Hey guys, welcome back to the Pharos Fit podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I am super excited today. I've met like a good deal of famous people in my career. I've met some really interesting people, but the person I'm with today, I'm kind of like intimidated to be in the presence of, because she is doing something that I just think is incredible. I think their whole project is incredible. What she's done, what she's doing, the risks she's taking. I think it's just such a noble and such an incredible thing. Her name is Carrie Richards, and she owns Richards Grassfed Beef. And first of all, welcome, Carrie.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a lot today about regenerative farming. We're going to talk about what it is, how it works, how we do it, how we can move towards it, and how Carrie got into it. So Carrie, I guess we'll start with your story, your history. How did you get to this place? We'll talk about your family history, and how did Richards Grassfed Beef come to be?
Well, first off, thank you for that intro. That was really sweet.
No, of course. I mean it. I'm sincere. Like it's...
that is so great. I'm hardly that big of a deal, but I appreciate that. Was really sweet.
I think you're that big of a deal.
Yeah, so I'm Carrie Richards. My brother Tom and Noelle, my sister Noelle, and I started Richards Grassfed Beef in 2013. The reason why we started that company is we have a ranch in our family. It was purchased by my great-grandfather in 1941. So we're the fourth generation. Our kiddos will be the fifth generation to run it. And, about 10 years ago, we decided, what's our stamp on this business going to be?
Yeah.
Right then was like the local food movement was growing.
Yeah.
I was getting really into like Omnivore's Dilemma, like all those kinds of books that
Sure.
were coming out about local food and pasture-raised meats. And we were like, hey, let's try it out. And I was living in the Bay Area at the time, so were my siblings. And the ranch is about an hour outside of Sacramento, California. So we were buying animals from our property and selling whole animals, cut up into retail steaks to families and friends. I sold a whole animal to my book club. So I sat in front of a garage with like a little scale and a calculator and slang beef to all my friends. It was real rough in the beginning.
Right.
But we decided, my brother and sister and I were like, hey, there's market here.
Yeah.
Like
sure.
we see something. Everyone that we were selling to had either been to the ranch or we took them to the ranch. And so they saw what we were doing with selling our product. And then my dad slowly kind of moved in the direction of like, okay, let's finish some animals and see how this goes. So that was about 2013. And then we hired our sales guy, Kyle, who is still with us today and is now a partner of ours.
Yeah.
And he helped us build kind of the wholesale side. So selling to restaurants, grocery stores, eventually now online. And basically about 2 years into that, we were like, oh, someone needs to be at the ranch. We had just gotten American Grass-Fed Association certified. So because we wanted a label that we could stand behind that said we were officially grass-fed.
Yep.
Because at the time USDA dropped grass-fed as a label.
Why?
So, I think because it was too much work and there wasn't enough, the grass-fed industry was so small.
Right.
It was such a tiny, tiny bit, and it still is a tiny bit of the overall beef market.
Right.
It wasn't worth their time.
Okay.
Organic was where they need to put their money.
Right.
Grass-fed got dropped. In my opinion, that's how it kind of went down.
Right.
So we went with American Grass-Fed. They had a good, robust label. And at the time, the ranch managers and my dad, they had to take notes. They had to write down if the animals had vaccinations or antibiotics. And we were getting these hilarious, hand scribbled, dirty sheets of paper and they were taking the notes, but it was so disorganized.
Right.
And so my brother, who is a tech guy, and my sister and I were like, we need to streamline this because our tagline is trust and transparency. We need to make sure that that's through and through. So my brother, being the tech guy, helped us build a database to track all of our animals, all the vaccinations. If they get an antibiotic shot, they go out of the program, what they're fed and all that stuff. And we still use that program today. Amazing. And so that has been the kind of pinnacle that's held our trust and transparency from the beginning. And so once we set that system up, we're like, somebody's got to take over. Like, somebody's got to work with Dad. How are we going to grow this? He sees the vision, but he's older. He's kind of done with starting new things. Like, it's time for us to kind of take over.
Wow.
So my husband and I were living in the Bay. I was a wedding and portrait photographer doing the beef company on the side. And then my husband worked for University of Berkeley Alumni Association. He had a good job. I was doing well with weddings. And we're like, let's move to the ranch and see how it goes. So we moved the kiddos. We lived at the ranch for about a month. We tried it out. And we're like, the ranch needs us.
Right.
Like, I went through all the paperwork. I saw kind of how things were being ran. And it wasn't that things were running that badly, like ecologically and like that kind of stuff. It was just things were drastically inefficient.
Right.
And to keep this going to the next generation, we really needed to tighten things up. And as much as my dad fought me to help him with that, in the end, it's good. Like, we're in a good place now, but at the time it was a risk, because
sure.
We're leaving our safety of our jobs in the Bay.
Yeah.
We rented our house, and then we moved up there for a year. That was in 2016. And then I got there and I was like, same thing everybody does, I'm sure, when the next generation's coming up. We're going to get chickens. We're going to get pork. We're going to do all the things. We're going to be Joel Salatin. We're going to move the chickens behind the sheep, and the guy's eyes just glazed over. And it was just kind of this year-long battle of being like, no, but there's so much opportunity. And then them being like, the realisticness of doing that on this property, they didn't align.
Right.
And so I needed help with finding a framework on how to run the ranch in a way that I felt good about and that I felt was efficient and sustainable over the long run. Yeah. So ironically, American Grassfed referred me to the Savory Institute, and that's where I learned about regenerative. And so that's where it all started. And that was late 2016. I took my first class with the Savory Institute in the fall of 17. Yeah.
And what's the main difference between grass-fed and regenerative?
So you can be regenerative and not be grass-fed. What regenerative really means is working with the land base that you have and taking care of the land base. So don't graze this riparian area during this certain time of year, because it's habitat for all these birds and insects and everything. So if you're going to graze it one time and fence it out for the rest of the year to make sure that habitat stays healthy.
Right.
And grazing things doesn't mean you're killing the habitat. It actually stimulates the growth of the grass. Right. So you obviously work out a lot.
Through poop, right?
Yeah, exactly. But what you're doing to those plants is you're stressing them out. If you work out really hard 10 days in a row, you're going to be toast. And you might stop working out.
Right.
Those plants, if you keep grazing them 5 days in a row, they're going to be toast, and they might die, and an invasive comes in. Right. So you got to work with the strength of the plants that you have and encourage the plants that you want. And that, to me, that's regenerative, is working with the land base that you have. Right.
Right. That makes sense. And because at a certain point in time, it was all kind of done this way.
Right. Yes. This is not new.
This is not new. Mm-mm. We're just returning to the way that things were done a long time ago. Mm-hmm. At what point, just for people listening, at what point did that really change? And why do you think it changed?
I'm very new to this industry, but in my perspective, I think it was when we decided to use fertilizer. Yeah. And when we decided to use herbicides, and we decided to make monocrops and subsidies. It's like when that all got tangled into one, then we had all of this cheap feed. Yes. And running cattle on these big properties until they were finished was not efficient. It was probably good for the land, but it wasn't efficient. And so then the feedlot system is built, and you have the cheap feed, you have the efficiency of all the animals in one place, and all the trucks come into one place and they go out, and efficiency wins. And it's America. Efficiency wins.
Efficiency wins.
Yeah.
short-term solutions win, because
Right.
often it's, how do I solve the problem now without thinking about what's going to happen in 30, 40, 50 years?
Right.
Because this is my administration and I need to be successful.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about what's happening in 40 years' time.
Yeah,
with that guy's
yada.
administration.
That's later.
Yeah.
This is now. So that came to bite us in the butt.
Yeah.
And, I don't ever want to point fingers at anyone, because I like to say that everyone's doing the best they can with what they got at the time. But that system is proving to be, now feed isn't cheap anymore.
Right.
And so is that an efficient system anymore? And now we're doing all of these cool measurements on our properties where grazing animals are happening. And we're learning if you work with the system, you can actually sequester carbon.
Yes.
And you're not just releasing it into the air.
Yes.
Oh, you can actually build back grasslands with animals, not just take them away and then they're gone forever and all you have is weeds. You can actually use these grazing animals to improve things. Yeah. And it was, for a long time, it was get the animals off the land, get the animals off the land. And then that's the whole savory talk is once they took all the elephants away, everything was still going south. It was still desertifying.
Yeah.
And so now that we have these measurements in place, we can actually measure that things are getting better in these grazing lands.
Yeah.
If grazed properly and you pay attention to the ecology.
Yeah. I mean, you can find a ton of stuff on YouTube about this. And, there's a lot of emerging documentaries now about how there's only, is it 60 years of topsoil left? I think if we keep going the way that we're going, there's only 60 years of topsoil left. And unless we replenish the soil, we're going to be in big trouble. And the way to replenish the soil is with cattle and with poop and with grazing and returning to that cycle of doing things.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be just like we were discussing earlier before we started. It doesn't have to be this okay, you have to dense up the cows and you move them every day and these are the rules because that's what Joel Salatin does and he's successful. You can have, because everybody lives on different types of property with different amounts of rainfall, and you can build a system that works for that environment. It doesn't have to be this thing that you do. You have to have the cows and then the sheep and then the pigs. People think that that's what regenerative means.
Right. And
that you have to do cover cropping and compost and all that stuff. And I apply for all those grants and I try all those things and some work better than others.
Right.
But I think what it really means is what you learn in holistic management, which is how you manage your property holistically, is us humans are part of the system.
Yeah, part of the cycle. Yeah.
Right? We are part of it. And so we can't just take ourselves out and work ourselves to death for the good of the land. We have to make every part of it work together, for the humans and the animals and the plants and the animals that we're working with.
Yeah.
So that was a big realization for me when I was told about that part. When we do our grazing plan, the first thing you do is you put in the holidays, you put in your kids' birthdays, you put in your vacation, if you go on one.
Yeah.
Some farmers don't.
Yeah.
You put all those in first, and then you plan all the farming activities around that. And then you start moving the cows, and then you realize we can't move the cows on that day. It's Easter, and we're going to have 40 people here.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you incorporate your life into the system, which is a really nice way to look at farming and ranching, because I'm sure you've met a dozen farmers and ranchers that are we work sun up, sun down.
Just exhausted.
That's what we do, and we're
never
exhausted.
Stop 7 days a week.
And it's wait, let's decide that probably doesn't work in the long term for people.
Yeah.
And how do we do it and not do that to people?
Yeah.
How do we incorporate the human health back to the system as well?
Super important.
Yeah.
Just for people listening, Joel Salatin is...
He is a farmer. I believe he's in Virginia, and he was featured in Michael Pollan's book, one of his books. I think it's Omnivore's Dilemma. Yeah. And Michael Pollan goes out to his farm and sees all the cool stuff that he's doing.
Right.
And Joel Salatin's amazing. He has written tons of books on farming and ranching and making money and how to do it properly. He speaks all over. He is really a foundational, he's a foundational person for the regenerative movement. Not, like we said before, not that this is new.
Yes.
But this way of farming and ranching, he's really shout at the rooftops, and really he has such a presence, and people listen to him.
Yeah.
And he has been he has been such a great voice for this community and this movement. And when I read about his place, like I said, I showed up to my ranch. I was like, we need 5,000 chickens.
Yeah.
Like, the chickens eat the fly larvae and the flies go away, you know, like, and it's all of these things you read about, but then you have to look at your property and go, oh, how am I going to implement this here? And maybe chickens don't make sense here because I can't get the grain cheap enough to make the bird cheap enough to sell it, you know, then to sell it to the people where they're like, it's a $60 bird. I'm not buying that.
Yeah.
So you have to think about all those inputs.
How many acres is your farm?
We're 6,500 acres.
6,500.
Yeah.
And so obviously I watched the Biggest Little Farm documentary. You've watched that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And how similar is your operation to that operation? And is that more like kind of what you're talking about with Joel?
Yeah,
like
that one's super diversified. So they have everything, including the orchards, and like they farm as well. We don't do any commercial farming. We are strictly cattle, sheep, and now we have a large pork program where we're using the animals to actually clear land for us. And then we're bringing in the cows afterwards and creating more pasture.
Oh, amazing.
Because we have a lot of shrubs and brush in our on our ranch, and I'd rather not use machinery when possible.
Yep.
And so the pigs do an amazing job. And then we bring in the sheep too and the cattle, and everyone kind of does their job, and then it's clearing that understory under the trees. So it's a really, it's a really cool program. So I have such a dry environment in my ranch. I can do that without completely demolishing the hillside. If I lived in a really wet area, those pigs might completely demolish the hillside. And then we have...
It's a mudslide.
Yeah, and then we have a mudslide. Yeah, but where we are and the way we move them and how often we move them and the fact that it's dry at certain times of year, they're not completely demolishing that hillside and turning it into a problem. They're actually doing really cool things for our property. So
yeah, on the subject of water, like owning a farm in California where, you know, drought is common.
It's terrifying.
How hard is that to manage?
It's become my number one priority, but when I got there, I was so overwhelmed by all the things. But now I'm like, okay, we need a water truck, and this is how big it needs to be. It needs to be 4-wheel drive. Like, our biggest issue right now, so we have 6,500 acres. About 2,000 of those acres are steep, brushy, and in an area that dries up in the summer, and we can't graze there because there's no stock water for the cattle. And so I've worked with the local, you know, government programs like NRCS and whatnot to build these like water trough and solar programs so I can get water in that backcountry. But those are really expensive programs and they take a long time to implement.
Okay.
So now I'm like, okay, short term, we need a water truck. And then we can push the animals further out in these areas that are a little bit more remote, but then they'll have water.
Right.
So I can't manage those areas really well in certain times of year because it dries up. And so we call it like where we are, it's like a winter ranch. So our growing season's from November to June 1st. And then June 1st to November, it is dry as a bone.
Right.
And so what I did last year, and this is part of like working with the Savory Network and meeting a lot of people that are, you know, doing similar things that we are and have the same certifications we have. I've met people that have pasture that I can send the animals to in the summer.
Oh, wow.
And so last year...
So you move your animals to different farms?
Yes. Oh. So we did that last year for the first time. And thank goodness we did it because it was like the worst drought.
Right.
And they weren't drinking out of our ponds or anything for that whole summertime. And so when the animals came back, they actually came back to food and water.
Wow.
They would have eaten it if they were...
And that's a farm in a different state? No.
It's in California, even more northern California. Right. Yeah. And so the cows came home in wonderful body condition because they were still on green grass that whole time. And then they came home and then they had all their little babies and now we just like branded and tagged them all. But we came, like, even though our ponds were really low and the water availability was really good or bad across the state, I was feeling okay about it because they were gone for so long that we did have kind of a backup. But then that crazy storm came in and filled all of our ponds. It was just like
a sign.
It was like Mother Nature was like, sorry, here you go.
Here you go.
Here you go, California.
Sorry for all the shit.
I know that this is really stressful, but here's a little tiny bit of ice cream. Yeah. So that was
That's
like,
fantastic.
October was like the, for all the farmers in California. It was like, oh my God.
When we talk about moving cattle, how many cattle are we talking? Like on any given day, like how many cows are on your farm?
So right now it's about 300.
Okay.
And then I take in animals in the winter because, like I said, our growing season is
Got it.
November to May.
So you're taking.
We have
animals
more
from other farms.
feed than we can eat in that time. But then we have no feed to eat. Not no feed, but it's dry and we have to save it for the fall in that summertime. So I bring in a lot of animals to get a lot of impact in that winter time. So I bring in about 100 more. So then we're about at 400.
Yeah.
And they're kind of ranging in the backcountry, finding all the little spots, and we'll feed them in certain areas to get them to impact. So we'll drive out there with the hay truck and they'll all come running. And we'll feed on top of some invasive species. And then they'll eat the hay and stomp it all down. And so we kind of just use them in the winter to like treat little areas. And then in the spring, when everything comes like crazy and it's growing so fast, we bring them all in and do the quick moves, like the daily 2-day moves.
Yeah.
And that helps boost the health of the pastures, of the grasses, because you're moving them and then you have it on your grazing sheet and you're like, okay, we have to wait 30 days to go back. Sometimes we can get a second round out of it. Sometimes we can't. It just depends on the pasture. And that's why you do a grazing plan.
Right.
Because in your mind, you're like, no, it's been 30 days. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
The old like, no, that's not how it looked. And then you look at the photo, you're like, exactly.
You did. Yeah.
Photo.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, just explain to me, like on a given day, like what does your day look like? I mean, like when I think of a ranch that's 65,000 acres.
Yeah.
How does one manage?
6,500.
Sorry, 6,500. Sorry, 6,500.
I was like stressed thinking about that.
That would be big. How does one manage an operation like that? Like, is it? I mean, we talked about you're trying to achieve more balance with the situation. You're trying to make farming more manageable. But what does a day in Carrie Richards' life look like?
Right now, it's a lot of child wrangling, to be honest, because this time of year, things kind of mellow out. We just did a big roundup last week, so it was 3 days of bringing the cows in, sorting the mommies and the babies apart, and then going through all the babies and looking at them and tagging them and categorizing them. So that was like a 3 full day event. And then we have to monitor them for about a week, make sure everybody's doing okay, that their brands are healing up and all that. But every season is different. So this time of year, we're moving pigs every few days versus in the summer, which is like a week, because there's moisture in the ground. And if we don't move those pigs, they will create crazy divots in the ground and mud pits. And so we're moving pigs every couple days. The sheep will move every week or so.
What's the main job of the sheep?
The sheep right now, it's funny that you asked that. I'm working on like a fire mitigation program where the sheep are funny because I don't really eat a lot of lamb, but we have people that buy from us, obviously, that do. Yeah. Well, great. I'm going to send you a lamb. But the sheep do an amazing job with like eating down. Like they do really well in the hot summer. And they eat all that feed down and create like fire breaks. Right. So I'm going to work on a fire mitigation program with them and perhaps increase my sheep herds for seasonally. Like buy young sheep, put 50 pounds on them, eating this one area to get like a fire break or whatnot on our property, and then sell them. So they're going to be like a tool, a fire break tool, and invasive species because they eat a lot of stuff. They're not like goats, but they will eat a lot of things. Right. So the sheep right now are a bit of a tool, and that's like their main purpose. And right now that's a very small herd, but we'll probably increase it next year during the growing season, to make sure we hit those invasive species hard, or the areas by the house that we want that grass to actually be low, because God forbid a fire does come in, it'll slow down if we have short grass right next to the house. So eating down the pastures around the house is their job right now. Amazing. And you can dense them up into these little small areas, and really use them for small management.
Why? So I come from the UK, obviously, and lamb is very popular there. Like I grew up eating a lot of roast lamb. Yeah. My mother's famous Sunday lunch was always roast lamb with mint sauce. Fantastic. Why is lamb so much more popular in the UK? Well,
I don't know.
It's weird to me.
I blame the hamburger. Like the rise of the perfect hamburger? Because I can't answer that question because I know that lamb was eaten a lot. Like my dad ate a lot of lamb when he was younger. I like it. Every time I'm served lamb, I go to a restaurant or I go to someone's house and I eat it. I like it. But for some reason, I don't think to make it. And we have it in the freezer, obviously. Right. But it's one of those things that I don't go, my brain doesn't go there. I don't know what it is. But every time I eat it, I love it.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, well, you know, when you think of America, you think of cattle, you think of cows, like it's the land of like
cows, hamburgers, ribeye steaks.
Exactly. You don't think of it as like sheep.
But here's the thing: is the sheep, especially in California, are such an amazing tool for fire mitigation. Yeah. So I have a feeling they're going to rise in popularity because I have friends that do fire suppression, and they go to like communities, like outside communities, and like, you know, the grass that grows up around the highways and it gets really tall. And that if that catches on fire, it'll just shoot right to those suburbs. So they get hired to like eat all that down.
Oh, shit.
And sometimes you see it, maybe they do them here in the hills, but in Oakland, they have the goats and sheep in the hills. Same thing, eating down that dry grass.
Is it cheaper to raise sheep than it is to raise cattle?
It's, you know, that's a great question. I think so.
I mean, just the fact they're smaller.
I joke that they always pencil. And I get mad because I'm like, damn sheep.
What does that mean, pencil?
Like when you do the math on how much it costs to raise them, you're like, the sheep are a really good deal. Yeah. Because they do really well in the summer. And the cattle kind of struggle in the summer if they're not on an irrigated pasture or you don't stockpile right or you don't supplement. In my environment where I am and where our ranch is. So but the sheep do fine. Yeah.
Cows are higher maintenance.
They look fantastic in July. And you're like, it's 1,000 degrees outside. How are you guys looking so like happy and fat and ready to go? So the sheep are probably a little bit more efficient in the like Mediterranean climate of California. Right. But it's not as popular of a meat. So what do you do? And so a lot of people are doing the fire suppression and mitigation stuff with the sheep. And then like a lot of people that I know sell those sheep just into the commodity market. They're all grass fed. A lot of them are in regenerative systems, but the market isn't huge.
Isn't there for lamb meat.
It's not huge. It's not big enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like
it is because it's honestly it's so popular in the UK. I know it's so popular in other parts of Europe and in the Middle East. But it just seems here as soon as I moved, it's like you very rarely do you see, I mean, sometimes you see lamb cutlets on the menu in a restaurant, but it's not like a common thing. Yeah. And it wouldn't be like, you know, you wouldn't go around someone's house and say, oh, we're having a lamb. It's like, oh, cool. Like, it's just not done. It's like,
it's more like, oh, that's fun. It's like
yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I'm biased too because I don't eat a lot of lamb. So like there could be a huge market out there that I just don't even know about because I don't market it. It's not a thing that I'm focused on.
But this is what we're going to do. Me and you are going to market lamb.
I know. We're doing this together.
Yeah. I want to bring roast lamb and mint sauce to the table.
Like I said, every time I have it, I love it.
But
it's not in my brain to be like, we're having lamb tonight. Like it just doesn't happen. And I don't know what that is.
Well, so much of it is advertising, right? So it's like, of course, in America, you get like the advertisement for burgers.
Oh my God. Chicken, burgers, chicken, burgers.
But you just, there's nothing ever in the media about lamb. So, for us, and I think we're in agreement, like this is the way that farming should be done. And this is the way that the everyone should be moving towards.
Right.
So the next question is like, why aren't people moving towards it? Why is it still such a kind of unknown way of farming to many? And how do we overcome that? Like, what's the process here?
It's funny because like I get asked this all the time. There's lots of people that are doing it and don't know they're doing it because it's like it's how their grandfather did it and it's how their parents did it and like they're doing it, but they don't know they're doing it. So there's that category. Then there's like the big, huge farms and big, huge ranches that just are doing what they've always done. And maybe it's not bad what they're doing, but they just don't know. They don't know that like,
maybe. Do they not know?
Well, maybe because they don't measure.
Right.
You know, there's no measurement of like before and after. Here's the before and after pictures. Like, we do kind of an extensive yearly measuring of water infiltration, biodiversity of plants and wildlife. And like, we look on the ground, like, are there bugs and spiders in this little area? We pull cores of soil and, do the measurements of carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
Like, but a lot of people don't do that. And they also don't know that that's an option. Like, when I tell people I'm doing that are other ranchers and farmers in my community that aren't part of my like savory group, they're just like, why do you do that? And then when I explain why I do it, they're like, oh, that's interesting. But you know how people get into their habits, and then it's scary to change.
It is, yeah.
So it was really scary for my dad. It was really scary for my ranch manager at the time.
Previous to you coming in and doing this, how was your dad doing it? He was using
it was like in his head. It was like, this time of year they go into the 180, and then we move him into Leona and these are all pasture names.
Right.
Move him to Leona, and we run out of feed, and then eventually we push him out the backcountry, and we know it's time to buy hay because they're standing at the top of the gate. Like, it's like it was a system that they used for years, but it wasn't based on the ecology. It was based on the animal.
Right.
It was like, the animal's ready for hay now.
Right.
The animal needs the hay now.
Okay.
And so I pushed that out. I was like, well, what if we waited a month to feed hay, and we tried to push them in the backcountry even further, like lock them down in this area where there's a beautiful pond, where they have plenty of water and plenty of feed. But because they're in this pattern of coming up the hill, like, if we can keep them down there for 2 weeks, there's plenty of food down there. They just don't go down there because their pattern is eat this beautiful meadow, eat that beautiful meadow, and then stand at the gate and wait for the hay truck to arrive.
Yeah.
Like, they get trained as well.
Yeah.
And so when we broke that pattern, it was, first of all, very scary for me, because I was like, I think it's going to work. Everything I read said it's going to work. But our cattle were trained one way.
Yeah.
And so, and then my dad was like, you're going to starve them all to death. They're all going to die.
Right.
And then, so that first year, we basically, the very first year, which was like, we used a very small group of animals, the finishers. And we overbuilt this electric fence. It was such an elaborate system.
Right.
It was like a half acre. We're going to have 50 animals per half acre. We're going to move them halfway through the day. And we're all excited, and we charge it up and electrocute ourselves a bunch of times because we're like, is it working? And then we open the gate and they blow through the fence. I mean, we had electric fence everywhere. Cows are running. Shit. It's like stuck on their horns. They're frolicking everywhere. And we're like, oh. So then, so we're like, okay, start over. Then we built it half as robust because we're like, if they do it again, then we want less to clean up. Yeah. And then we put some hay in there. So they kind of slowly went in there. So we had to train the animals because they weren't used to electric fence.
They're used to what they used to, yeah.
Oh my God. And it was comical. Like, once we were done being mad, we laughed at ourselves. We're like, this is something we're going to talk about in the future. And so now our animals are used to it. And then if we do bring animals in from another place, another rancher or whatnot, we either find out if they know they've been trained on electric fence, or we go through a training process where we put them in a small pasture and we just do one line of electric fence. They eat one side, and then we move the line, and then they eat the other side. That usually trains them pretty quickly because they put their nose on the electric fence and they're like, nope, stay away from that. Got it. And then it's really a mellow transition for them usually.
How long did it take to go from like, is this going to work, to this is working? Or are you even at that point yet?
Yeah, well, I'd say now we're at it. It's working because I've had multiple years to reassess and redo.
So that's 2013 to 2021?
Well, no, I didn't switch. No, 17. I didn't switch to like holistic management or anything regenerative really until the end of 17. So
that's 4 years. It's taken to be like, okay.
The thing that has increased dramatically quickly is we are sequestering more carbon, and our pastures where we are holistically managing, so like the areas that are closer to the house that I'm moving the animals often, the diversity in those plants is tenfold of the backcountry.
Right.
Where I'm not doing as much of that because it is hilly and there's not as much fencing and we run out of water.
Is that what so if someone were to come up to you and say, the problem is Americans are eating too much beef and it's killing the planet.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, what's your retort to that statement?
That's a tough statement that I am faced with every day.
Yeah.
So I don't claim to have the answer, but I do claim to show people what I'm doing is actually putting carbon in the ground. It's actually improving the land that I'm working and living on. And I see more wildlife every year. I see more diversity in plants every year. So my rebuttal usually, if it's a person and it's a one-on-one thing, is come see what I'm doing.
Yes.
Come to the ranch.
Yeah.
And then you want more information, go visit White Oak Pastures in Georgia.
Right.
See what they're doing.
Right.
Read Joel Salatin's books.
Right.
There are other ways outside of the feedlot system that everyone thinks is the only way beef is raised.
Yeah.
There are other ways of raising animals. I get that people are really scared of beef, and all the alternatives have made it their number one marketing tool to scare people away from beef and lamb and dairy and all of that. And there are systems that could be improved upon. But also what I feel like as well is pointing fingers at like the people that are doing the wrong things. That is not a way to bring everybody together, like with anything.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real.
Biggest problem in the world right now.
Yeah, like, okay, they're bad, we're good.
Yeah.
I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
I feel like the feedlot system could be improved. I feel like the monocrop system could be improved. Maybe we put some cattle on those corn stalks after they're done harvesting.
Right.
Let's see what happens there. Like, there's incremental steps that you could do that aren't as scary as they seem. And if you just get people to work together a little bit, which can be very challenging, I understand.
Sure.
We can all kind of pivot towards the right direction.
Yeah.
Like I ate vegan for a while. It didn't work for me, obviously. I've tried all the different things, and I get it. Different people can thrive on different things, and that's okay. But pointing fingers at everyone like you're the bad one, that doesn't move the needle.
Right. And as with so many things, ignorance is usually always the problem. So people are ignorant of this topic and of this subject and of this method.
Yeah.
And so they just like demonize beef as like, this is the reason the planet's dying.
This is the one reason. And there's so many other factors about how we treat our earth that are huge, like transportation, and like there's just so many other factors. To focus on this one thing is kind of, it's not looking at the whole picture.
Well, it's irresponsible, and it's not like soy farming is great for the planet. So it's like, you know, the problem is right now. I mean, I always talk about, you know, nutrient dense foods and how you know, well-raised beef is probably the most nutrient-dense food on the planet. Beef, elk, all that kind of stuff. Right. And on the counter side, all these like newer foods that are coming through that claim to be, you know, meat substitutes are often chemically made. They contain a ton of additives. Right. The farming practices they use to get those additives are not good. So you're trading one problem for a potentially an even bigger one, and you're making people eat artificial things that we have never eaten before in the history of mankind. Right. Whereas, you know, beef, animals we've been eating since the dawn of time. So it's, you know, it's something that I find very difficult to navigate when I'm talking to someone who, you know, has made that choice, because I fully support everyone's decision in what they want to eat, and everyone's welcome to do whatever they want to do. Yeah. But it's a hard argument for me to digest when people do talk about, you know, I don't eat beef because of I think it's bad for the planet, so I eat these things. I'm like, I'm not sure that's really solving the problem. Yeah. or making humans healthier at all. Right. In fact, I would argue it does the opposite, but that's for another. Oh, totally. Another discussion. Totally.
But yeah, and it's when you encounter someone that has that deep belief, sometimes the conversation isn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
Like, but sometimes I get people, like I had an old friend come up to me and she was like, oh, you know, congrats on your business. And then she like tilted her head and she was like, how do you do it?
Right.
And I was just like, oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, I explained that
how do you do it from a moral perspective?
Morally. Right. And I was just like, okay, here we go. Like, I always knew that this question was going to come up. You know, it's never been this direct, but here we go. And basically, my cattle live an amazing life. Yeah. And yes, their life ends, and I choose when their life ends. And that's hard to deal with. Yeah. But I'm giving them a really good life. They are actually working with me on improving the lands that, because we buy from not just our place, but from our cousins and a couple other partners that are all partaking in holistic management. And so whether they come from our place or our partner places, I know that they are being raised to a standard that I can totally 100% back. I know that they are improving the land because we're measuring it. And I know that they are going to be the healthiest version possible of that protein because we're giving them all the things they need. Because part of what we do as holistic management is when it's dry out, I need to supplement those animals with mineral and protein because they need just a little bit of protein to keep their rumen happy. And then when it's really, really green, that's too much proteins, then we need to supplement a little bit with some dry forage. So part of holistic management is making sure your cattle are always eating what they're supposed to be eating. And people, when they think of people that raise cattle, they're just like, wow, they stick them out on the pasture and then they throw them into feedlots. Yeah, people do that. That does happen. But there's people like myself that are doing things that are not only good for the earth, but good for the actual animal. And then you're going to be eating the healthiest version possible of that protein. And so, you know, how do I do it? It's a tough question to answer because when you think of it only from that perspective, there's only one answer in that person's mind. It's like, you're the devil. You know what I mean?
There's a lot of people that assume that they've taken the moral high ground. And no one else is going to measure up to that high ground. So and that
person in particular, I told her, I was like, when we do a farm tour, come see. And that's usually my rebuttal is just come see what we're doing. Like, take the time to educate yourself and understand. Come see what we're doing and understand that I am one out of thousands of farmers that are doing really cool stuff. And another thing is, like, we all agreed a while ago as a community, especially in the health and fitness community, processed foods aren't so good for you. And now all of a sudden we're driving in that direction at 1,000 miles an hour. And it's like,
it's kind of mind blowing.
Wait, what happened there? And so that's why I'm like, I agree with you. That's like, is that the right direction to go? Some people can thrive off of a non-meat or dairy diet, but is the processed version of it a good idea? So
I mean, it's a difficult, like I said, it's a difficult subject for me to deal with when people like ask me about it because, you know, I have fairly strong beliefs on this topic, and it's very hard to, like I said, you want to be understanding of people and you want to listen to them and you want to take their point of view in and you want to be, you don't ever want to dismiss people. You want to have the conversation, but at a certain point when that enters the discussion, like these man-made foods that we're now, you know, when you're trying to create a food that looks like meat and smells like meat and isn't meat, but it's just why are you creating like meat's already available? And I get it, but it's also not cheap. The finance thing comes into it, but you can do it that way, but it's very expensive. I mean, these chemically made meats are not cheap.
Well, and they're made from sometimes they're made from subsidized products, so the actual cost isn't even in there, because it's coming from a subsidized product. So it's like the true cost isn't even really in there.
It's a minefield.
I know.
And also, you know, we talked a little bit about this before, you know, in private conversations, but when it comes to media and when it comes to attention, you know, that side of things, so the vegan side of things and the non-meat solution seems to get a ton of press, a ton of attention, a ton of media. The regenerative farming movement gets nothing, relatively. I mean, why is that?
I don't know. That's my immediate answer. But my assumptions are profits. Those meat alternatives make tons of money because they're taking a product that's cheap and they're turning it into this moral high ground answer that they can price whatever they want because it's making people feel good by buying it.
Making people feel virtuous, which is like the thing of the day.
And then they're spending all their marketing dollars hating on what we're doing. And saying regenerative doesn't work, it doesn't scale, blah, blah, blah. And they have the funding to tell us to go away.
Right.
Regenerative doesn't really
Have that kind
the
of
margins are
backing.
small. They are small.
Mm.
And like that's the thing is the reason why the margins are small is because regenerative isn't being pushed as the answer. I mean, I'm pushing it as the answer.
Right.
But I'm not a billionaire
Right.
corporation
Well, it's like
with
if
an
Bill-
endless budget.
Like we said before, if Bill Gates had the biggest regenerative farm in America, then I guarantee you we'd be hearing about it. It would
Yeah,
be-
and that's the thing is like it, and you know, I've heard through the rumor mill that a lot of people that invest in Beyond Burger also invest in regenerative because they're hedging their bets.
Right.
And right now all the funding is in Beyond and those kind of businesses.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but when I transitioned our place to a more regenerative program and holistic management, I didn't really realize there is a lot of supplemental like funding out there, you know, and grants and whatnot. And there's even more now.
For regenerative farming?
Yeah,
Oh.
for like
that's
compost
good.
application and no-till drilling, because these practices are becoming a thing and people are like going, oh, because they're measuring. They're going, oh, if we put these,
Right.
you know, nitrogen fixing plants in and then we graze it, then the carbon, you know, sequestration goes up by this much. So now that we're measuring,
You have the data to
we
back
have
up
the data
everything.
to back it up. And so like it's been really exciting to like I just got emailed the Healthy Soils grant application and I'm like, yes, like because
Right.
it existed when I started all this, but I didn't know about it. And so like there are resources for people out there to help them transition and to try out some of these things where there's no risk, because you can take the grant money and you can work with the local, you know, the local college or other farmers that have done it and like see and measure before and after. Like, so there are resources and they are building, but it's still new. It's
Right.
still new and the science keeps changing. Like they used to take a core sample that's like this long and now it's shorter and now it's fatter. And then the water infiltration little tube that we use to see how fast the water gets soaked in the ground, it used to be really wide and now it's really narrow, because like the science is also changing along with the measurements.
Right.
And so we're trying to figure out what the most efficient and cheap way to do this is. Soil
Right.
samples used to be $300 a pop and now they're way less. And so like it's moving in the right direction, but in my opinion it's like, come on.
Let's go.
Come
Let's
on.
go. I saw in one documentary where there is a group of people who are going to farms and trying to teach people and show people how to do this. What's that movement?
I don't know. It could be Kiss the Ground. Was it Kiss the Ground?
I think that was the documentary.
Yeah. So they've done a bunch of videos and they actually funded our
That's a great documentary,
video.
by the way. If you haven't seen that Kiss the Ground documentary, you have to watch that documentary.
Yeah,
it's
it's
so
great.
good.
So they're an amazing organization and they do education. They do they fund a lot of, like you said, videos and movies. They did our movie, and so they're an amazing resource for people. I read their book like early on, and didn't like they had resources at the time, but it wasn't like the way it is now. Like there's just a lot more education out there now. And also a lot of people reach out to me and they're like, "Can I pick your brain?" And I always say yes. Because I was there.
You were that person.
I was that person. Like,
Yeah.
I think like reaching out to people that either like are doing stuff that you're inspired by, like it's such a good thing to do. And it's scary because you're like, what if they never answer? But like, then they never answer and you ask the next person.
Right.
But like, I think reaching out to farmers that are and ranchers that are doing stuff like this is the best way to find out more information.
Yeah.
And like I encourage everyone, they can reach me through the website. But it's crazy. I feel like it's coming around. And
well, I hope so. I really do.
Yeah, it was the number one. What was it? The last year when the world shut down, it was the number one food trend on like Whole Foods' like study of like
grass-fed carnivore type stuff.
Yeah, it was like regenerative was the number one food trend.
Oh,
and then the world shut down.
Right.
And so we're almost like a year behind.
Right.
Right? Because like everything was like, you know, Food Expo West got canceled and all the big food shows, like it just all kind of fizzled. But now here we are, like, okay, let's start the engine
Rebuilding.
again. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. Like my friends, I've noticed just in the years that I've left the Bay Area and moved to the ranch, they forward me articles all the time. And they're like, look, like this was in the New York Times or this was in, you know what I mean? Like it's becoming more and more of a thing.
You just gotta get one media outlet behind you, just like plug it and you'll be there.
I know.
In terms of your kind of like diet, like what's your thing diet wise? I've done carnivore, I've done paleo, like all these things, but yeah.
So what I do best on is like a paleo type diet.
Right.
Is like a Whole30 type diet, like not a lot of grains, not a lot of dairy. If I am eating dairy, it's like full fat, but I don't eat a lot of it.
Right.
And a lot of meat, a lot of veggies. Like that's my diet. But let's be honest, there's a local bread maker that lives right next door to our ranch.
Right.
So I eat some of that.
Yeah.
And then there's a guy that makes like buffalo mozzarella.
Right.
And I eat that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not like, I never go and I never eat out at all these places. But I mainly am like a paleo Whole30 kind of diet.
And when it comes to vegetables, because you don't grow any vegetables on your farm, do you get them from other local farms?
So we do a summer garden, a pretty big one. Yeah. And so that lasts from May until just about now. It's starting to die off. But we live close to so many amazing farms. And we have an amazing co-op right by our house in town. And so I buy all the veggies from there, basically.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice. And then we have amazing farmers markets, too. And then there's like the watermelon guides. We buy all our watermelons from him in the summer because he's right down the road. So we just we try so hard to source all the food that we eat locally. And then like our neighbor just brought us a bunch of persimmons for all the pigs. And so we're like super excited about that.
Amazing.
So I'm getting better and better because I lived in the Bay Area for so long. So making the transition to buying things that are in season was a shift.
Yeah, for sure.
And so now I know like what's in season. And when people bring me strawberries in January, I'm like, not. People, this is not the time of year for strawberries.
That's kind of fascinating because it's like most people just wouldn't even think about that.
No,
they wouldn't even enter the sphere of their
minds.
And
you eat it and you're like, this is a strawberry product,
right?
Because it has no flavor.
There is no way. Yeah, there is no way that this can exist right now.
Totally. I'm just like, strawberries in January.
So you're a mother of two.
Yes.
You play soccer, you coach soccer, and you run this farm. How the fuck do you do it all? Like, how do you fit it all in?
It's not graceful. I'm going to tell you that. It's hard. It is hard. We are actually looking to hire a full-time ranch manager.
Right.
Because I have two little kids and they're very athletic and we're starting to get in competitive soccer and traveling and like all that stuff. So part of the holistic management thing is like, how do I get this ranch running in a way that it can pay for someone to help us?
Yes.
Because
my gym. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's like, okay, we can still work here Monday through Friday, but we need a weekend person. And maybe that person works Friday to Wednesday.
Right.
Like, how do we make this work for our life? And not saying that person would never have weekends off. Let's be real.
Yeah. But how do you scale, basically?
How do we scale our business? How do we scale our life?
Yeah.
And how do we have the ranch work with us? That is really important to me because when I first moved up there, the kids were tiny. And so they were on the farm the whole time. And we didn't have to really worry about much. But then now that like one was in preschool and then the next one was in kindergarten and now they're second and fourth grade and they are just 100 miles an hour every direction. And one's into horses and one's into soccer and one wants to play basketball. And I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
The new like budget for 22 is how do we hire someone?
Yeah.
But continue to make money and to continue to like make sure that the person we're hiring has the same like values as us.
Yeah.
Because we don't want
and that's what I was going to say is it would be easier at that point to start taking shortcuts because it's kind of like,
right.
God, if we just did this and it would be so much easier, but then this is against my principles. So
right. And that's what we get caught up in.
Yeah.
It's like right now the sheep, ideally we'd be moving the sheep more often, but we just don't have the manpower right now.
Right.
And so like how do we keep it going in the direction we want it to go? Probably involves another person. And we've been doing an apprenticeship program. But I think ideally we continue to do the apprenticeship program, but we have a full-time person that we can kind of like work with them on doing the management of the property itself. Because I also, I have 2 leases that I manage where the cows go for either finishing or like the summer pasture. So I'm not just managing my property now, I'm managing these leases.
Right.
And so things are expanding, but I'm only one person.
Right.
And I don't want to work my poor husband to death.
You going to change the camera? No, just 1 hour. Oh, great.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah. So my husband right now is a saint. God bless him. because he is doing all the things while I'm like making all the phone calls and sending checks and invoicing and marketing and like running around. And then, we got to move the pigs. Okay, we run outside, we move the pigs. It's just, right now it's a little chaotic.
Wow.
But we're doing it.
It's
great. And I wish I had more wherewithal to like document it, because it's not a regular story. Yeah. It's not a regular job.
Here's the other question. As a female rancher, I mean, how do I word this? So you're moving into what was traditionally a male field, right?
Right.
Being a rancher, and you came in. Not only were you doing something risky in terms
like a
of
double
regenerative
whammy.
Farm, you're also a young woman doing it.
Thank you for calling me young.
And did you have any resistance against that? Did that make it even more challenging? Or did people not take you seriously? Like,
yes, to all those.
Right.
God bless my dad. He raised me like, you can do whatever you want. You're fine. You're in charge.
Right.
You're a girl, but who cares? And so I had that mentality. I did bump up to, I got little lady to lot, I got, like where I signed up for the Cattle Women's Association. And then I was like, I think I need to go to the Cattle Men's Association meeting, because they're the ones that are trading the cattle.
Right.
And so like, there's been some things like that
going
on where I'm like, I need to be part of like both sides of things. But yeah, it was like, I was the like second youngest in my family in the family. And so I'm the one like taking over. So like that was probably interesting for my
family
dad
dynamic,
to be like, you're the one that's going to be doing it. Okay.
Right.
Interesting. Expectation, pivot.
Yeah.
And then, I got little lady a lot, but growing up, I just never had the you're a woman, so you can't do it as good mentality. And I never felt that presence from other people, maybe because I wasn't looking for it, or I never encountered it. And maybe if I did, I blew it off.
Right.
And so that didn't intimidate me,
right,
really. So it never became an issue, like that big of an issue.
Right.
Is the short end of the story.
Right.
But it was something that I bumped up against, and I was just like, okay, we're gonna push past this.
Yeah.
Because I ain't got time for this.
Yeah,
I gotta
exactly.
make this thing profitable.
So
we gotta move forward.
It's the least of your worries at a certain point.
Totally.
Much bigger things to worry about.
Yeah.
I didn't tell you this, but I went to look at a ranch the other day near to where I live, and it's only 4.4 acres. But it's this beautiful 6-bed house with 4 bathrooms, 4.4 acres.
Yeah.
It had stables, really nice property in close to where I live in Idlewild.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't talk numbers too much, but the price of this property was the same price as my property, pretty much.
Right.
And mine's obviously a lot smaller, on a half acre.
Yeah, because values
I was asking, why is this the case? And the realtor said to me, people just don't want this lifestyle anymore. It's just too much work. And I was like,
I know.
I get it. But when you hear stuff like that, it's like, God, what happened to people?
Right.
It's
like, how do we grow enough food for the world? It's like everyone does a summer garden.
Right.
Do a summer
Everyone
garden
needs to
and
work
you have
at
plenty of food for 6 months out of the year.
You have a property like a 4.4 acre, you could,
Yeah.
you could certainly supply food for your own family.
Right.
And then probably a good amount of families
you
around
can produce a lot on
Yeah.
that amount of it. Yeah.
So it all comes down to work ethic at the end of the day. Like how much
That's
work
so
are you
interesting.
willing to do?
Yeah, because where we are, there's a lot of they call those ranchettes, small properties that you could definitely have horses, you could have goats, you could have a farm. Those are really popular in our area, and people utilize it.
Yeah.
They have 2 horses on it, and then they have a huge garden and stuff. So maybe and so down here, is it not so much that way?
Yeah,
according to the realtor. Yeah.
Apparently, it's really hard to sell property there because people just don't want that much work. Don't want to take on that much work. And it's not you're not in the middle of nowhere. It's 20 minutes from my house.
Right.
So it's not you're not in the sticks. So it's kind of wow, people have really gotten that.
It's so sad, but at the same time, life is so busy. Think
It
about our
is.
phones.
It
If I had my phone on the table, it'd be going bing, bing, bing this whole time we're talking.
Well, this is the thing. And this is the thing for me. It's but you have a property like that, and it does take management, and then you have this thing to manage, and then you have that to manage. It's
Right.
where does everything fit in? Whereas maybe 50 years ago things were a lot more simple, but
They
don't know.
definitely
But
were.
it's still like that kind of
Yeah.
thing appeals to me because, of my
Oh,
headspace.
yeah, and
But-
it's so
but
great.
I watch way too much Yellowstone. So it's like,
Oh my God, that show.
whenever I see something, I'm like, yeah, I could do this. I
That's
could do
the
this.
number one show that people screenshot and send to me.
Oh, really?
They're just like, I think of you every time I watch it. I'm like, that's interesting because
It's
it's
not
a
like this.
really crazy story.
Yeah. Do you watch it?
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it. I'm like, for one, I don't go anywhere in a helicopter, guys.
Right.
So just letting you know.
You're not quite the female Kevin Costner.
No.
But I'm borderline obsessed with that show. Everyone.
No, it's an exciting show. I get why it's so popular.
But I'll tell you what is interesting. It is.
There's a lot of really good one-liners from that show.
There is. But what's interesting is how popular it is. So that and the whole return to westerns that's coming through this in the next few months. There's a lot of westerns being made. There's a lot of return to that kind of film.
That's why I think it's interesting that your realtor said that, because there has been, since the COVID thing, there has been an influx to where we live of Bay Area, Sacramento, LA.
Right.
I mean, it's like the property amounts, because the town that my kids go to school in is Grass Valley. And so it's close to Tahoe, it's close to Sacramento, but it's a small town and it's lovely. Those housing prices have skyrocketed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Idlewild itself, where I am, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
But what I think happened was that is just a step too far now.
Right.
Because people have got to do things in phases. Like, I'll leave the city, but I need to go somewhere like this.
Where I do have neighbors, but not too many neighbors.
Right.
Yeah.
But then maybe that's the next.
Yeah.
So maybe what I'm saying now is like, if I got that property now,
totally.
in 5 years' time, I might be on a gold mine. Like, who knows?
I know.
But so my point was, it's kind of fascinating how people are now like kind of obsessed with that way of lifestyle again, the old West.
Well, it's so
and
different
cowboys
from now. Like everyone's inside, everyone's on a screen.
Right.
And so you're like, oh my God, being outside all the time, what's that like? Oh, what's that lifestyle like? And it's just like, which is crazy to me. But
it's crazy,
but
also,
I get it. I also totally get it.
And in a technology obsessed world where it's all about like social media and all that shit, it's so nice to be like, oh, but that life doesn't have any of that. It's like almost like an idyllic return to humanity.
Oh my God, I know. I notice, like, if I'm out building fence and I'm like listening to a podcast, sometimes just listening to a podcast, it checks you out of the environment you're in. You have to like turn it off and be like, I'm outside. There's birds, like there's wild animals, like let's be outside. Yeah. But sometimes you just get in those modes. You're like, oh, I have to build fence. Okay. Listen to a podcast. Like, but you have to turn it off. You have to like consciously turn it off. Yeah, you tough.
Really do. And it is tough because, like you said, the phone's always pinging. There's always an Instagram message. There's always an email. There's always fires to put out, when you have a business.
Right. And literal fires sometimes.
For you, more so. Yeah.
We have been lucky, knock on everything. We haven't had any. We had lots of fires like 5 miles away, but the way the winds blow, like I'm obsessed with the wind app. I'm like, nope, fire's not going to get us. Because I know kind of the wind patterns in the summers. Yeah. Not that those won't change or that they could change, but for the most part. So we've had a lot of fires that are like in our town, but because of where they're located, I'm like, we're good.
You're okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I scared my poor apprentice to death last year because she was from Virginia. And I'm like, it's fine. And then she didn't tell me that she was like, I was up all night. And I was like, oh no, I'm so sorry. So, and then I showed her the app. I'm like, this is how the wind blows. Like, it's not going to come over the hill. And this is why. And if it does, here's the plan. And so like, that was a learning moment for me. I was like, I got to prepare people that work for me. Where are the exit routes? What's the plan with the animals? Like, it was a big eye opener.
Well, there's that scene in the Biggest Little Farm where they have that thing where the fires come right up against the board, and it's like, oh my God,
and those
like,
winds
what happens?
And the trees, and that was crazy.
Terrifying. Listen, Carrie, thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah.
I love talking to you. I love everything you're doing. I find the subject fascinating, but also obviously super important. And I hope more and more people listen and educate themselves and obviously buy product from you and farms like you. And this just continues to grow. What is the best way that people can get in touch with you, purchase from you, understand what you're doing? What are your...
All right. Well, thank you for having me. This has been lovely and so much fun. And apparently I need to start working out a little bit more. This gym is amazing. So I am Carrie Richards. You can reach me at Richards Grassfed Beef. We sell product online, but I'm also happy to talk to anybody about any questions, certifications, how we ranch and farm. Totally open to it. Everybody that orders online their first time, they get 15% off with the code thank you. And we always have new products and stuff coming out, so just check our website out, sign up for our newsletter, and
and we also have codes through Pharos, so we can give you a discount with the Pharos code. So I think it's Pharos 15
Pharos
is the code.
15. You can use either one.
You can get you can use either one.
Yep.
And there's a ton of good products on there. I just ordered my my Thanksgiving meal, my prime rib, 2 prime ribs, which is going to be fantastic. We're doing it up in Idlewild with the family. My family are actually flying out from the UK.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're going to be with me for the first time in 2 years. And they're
my goodness, that's a celebration.
And they're going to stay from Thanksgiving right through to Christmas.
Nice.
They haven't seen my son since he was born, obviously.
Oh, that's so
that's
exciting.
going to be a special time.
Yeah.
And we'll all be eating Richards Grassfed Beef around the table. So that's super exciting.
So exciting.
But yeah, I look forward to continue to work with you. I'm going to do everything I can to help you guys out, because I'm just in awe of what you guys are doing. I think it's fantastic. And we're going to raise awareness through the club and at the club. And, if anybody is listening and they do want to kind of help out, raise awareness, that kind of stuff, reach out to me and I'll point you in the right direction. And the Kiss the Ground documentary, I think it's on Netflix. Make sure you watch that. Your documentary is also on Netflix.
Yep. And
What's
it's
it called?
A New Regeneration.
That's it, A New Regeneration.
And it's on the Kiss the Ground page.
It's on the Kiss the Ground page, and it's only like 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's, like 20,
it's a short one,
minutes.
so it's an easy watch. And the other one is The Biggest Little Farm, which I think is also on Netflix.
Yeah, I believe so.
But they're great documentaries. You'll learn a lot about regenerative farming. It's a super interesting story. It's kind of charming. Well, it's very charming. You learn a lot about, what this whole thing is, why it's important, and kind of the magic of it, like the magic of the circle of life.
Yeah.
Which is what it's really all about.
Exactly.
Not trying to change.
And understanding it and working with it.
Working with it, bringing everything back into harmony.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. That is it for this week. We'll be back with you next week. As you know, we are now fully open at 1316 Glendale Boulevard. You can follow us at Pharos Echo Park. And take care. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. This will be our last podcast before Thanksgiving. So take care of that. Have a great one. Enjoy your time with your families and friends. And we'll see you real soon. Take care.